What's going on, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of Pivotal Conversations. So, one thing I want to mention before we dive into this episode and give you some context to the episode is over the next month, we're going to be bringing you a whole month of podcast episodes dedicated to fitness technology. And the reason we're doing it, I mean, you guys have heard me. I'm pretty vocal about it. I think technology is shaping our industry at the moment. I think with the big guys and the big players coming into, the big players coming into the space, I really think that we're obviously seeing technology be accelerated dramatically, and I think that it's definitely going to change the way the industry functions in a sense, right? So we're going to dedicate a whole month of fitness technology education and podcasts. So this is going to include guests. It's going to include in-house business talk about how you can apply it and some core concepts that you want to understand. But I think just initially, like, there's something I want to explain, and a lot of people when they hear me talk about this, they think to themselves, yeah, but like Apple Fitness, like that, we do different things. Like, I'm a coach. I help people acquire a skill. I do this, blah blah blah. Right? And I get it. And you're not exactly wrong, right? But the reality is that competition exists in many different levels. And, most people only see the narrow level. They only see, okay, well, if I'm working at a gym, my competitors are the other people at my gym. If I'm working as an online coach, my competitors are other online coaches. And the reality is, like, the thing that actually, the level of competition that actually matters the most in the current day is resource. The most important thing to an individual is time, and the second most important thing to an individual is money. That is what humans value most, because money buys food. Money is a key to survival in today's modern age, and time is the most valuable and quickly becoming the most valuable, or I guess accelerating, because it's scarce. Like the iPhone to some people takes up 5 hours of their fucking day, right? And it's like that is we are unconscious to this, like, because it's addictive. It's taking up our time, but we are conscious that we do not have as much time. And that's why, a lot of technology is purely there to save people time. Uber was born to save people time hailing a cab in the rain, right? Netflix saved people time from fucking going to the video store. Like, the reality is that's what technology is here to do. And time is the greatest resource. And these big companies, what they're doing is they're saving people time. They're making decisions easy for them. That's what technology does. And if somebody is spending their time doing a Peloton workout, they are not coming to the gym. They are not seeking online coaching. So that means it is shaping, and it is a form of competition. And that is important, and that's why I think that understanding technology and making sure you understand technology is absolutely fucking pivotal, and is going to be pivotal to the progress and your ability to separate yourself from the pack and to survive. More importantly, just to fucking survive over the next 2 years, 5 years, whatever you want to call it. It is absolutely pivotal. Right, because that's it's on a resource level. Like, Netflix's biggest competitor is sleep. It's not fucking other streaming services, because they understand that if people aren't spending time watching Netflix, they're probably going to bed. That's the only time we turn it off, and that's an important lesson for people out there in the fitness industry who don't think Apple Fitness and Barry's Bootcamp going online and Peloton and these things are going to affect the industry. And affect the way it's done. It's going to change the perception. So that's why we're doing a fitness technology month. Today's episode is with an extremely smart human. It's an honor to talk with him. I think he's probably one of the most intelligent guys I've met and spoken to and had the honor to. We're talking today with Dr. Ian Kaplan, right? So he's like the the head of product at Hybrid Performance Method. I did a podcast with Hayden Bowe not too long ago, and he said you should really have a chat with Ian. I think you'll enjoy it, and he was definitely right. So shout out to Hayden if he's listening. Thanks for the recommendation. But there's a few really good points in here, and we kind of start off discussing the way technology is shaping the fitness industry. But I think towards the end, you get an insight not into just what is going to make you and differentiate you along the journey, and why you probably need to really put some effort into understanding technology and how it shapes the industry, but just into success in general, and like, continuous progression, and why some people progress and why some people don't. I'm very lucky that I get to talk to some pretty influential and successful people. And, the one thing that I can say across the board is that there's an absolute love for learning, and there's an absolute love for progression that drives them internally, and they don't do anything for external gratification. And I think that's just one thing that, I got out of this conversation is that, in reality, the people that are the most successful don't do something. We understand that results occur, but really we're doing it for self-progression, and we're not looking for any external gratification. And I say we because I believe I'm in that camp. And I really want to stress that when you're listening to this episode, I think you want to at least, and maybe, maybe you're not doing everything you can do, right? But time's not up, and time's your biggest asset, so start using it. And I think that's what you want to get. You want to get this, you want to find something you love so much, you're so passionate about, that you could learn for it, you just don't get sick of it. And progressing through it, and learn for the sake of learning. It's not it. It's actually fall in love with learning, and I think that's one thing that Ian communicates really well. So as I said, I'm not going to bother you too much with this intro. We're going to kind of kick on with this, but Fitness Tech Month is here. Tune in, get excited, because if you're going to be successful over the next 10 years, you're probably going to have to understand technology and understand how it's going to shape the industry. So the next month is for you. And if, as always, if you enjoy the episode, let us know. Give us, reach out. We would love your feedback. We would love to hear if you enjoyed it. Obviously, hit the subscribe button so that we can, the more support we get, the greater level of guests and more, amazing guests we can get on, such as Ian, such as anyone we've had on this podcast. We want to continue to do good work for you guys. So, get on it and enjoy. See you on the other side, guys. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am sitting here with Ian Kaplan. So Ian is one of the brainiacs from Hybrid Performance Method. He's someone who I was lucky enough to have a conversation with just about 3 weeks ago. First time we've met, and after that conversation, it was definitely it was a no-brainer to get him on the podcast. He's someone who's extremely intelligent, but also has a really great understanding of the digital business model and the digital landscape when it comes to owning a business and building a successful business in the fitness industry. So, Ian, where does this find you for the listeners?
I'm coming in from South Florida, specifically Pompano Beach, pretty close to Miami, where Hybrid is. So
awesome.
Hybrid, yeah.
Is it sunny there at the moment? Is it always sunny in Florida?
It's always sunny, except for the 3 months a year when it's raining, which is not now. It's very nice right now. It's winter. I mean, it's not your reverse winter or whatever you have going on in the other hemisphere.
Australia is weird, man. Like Melbourne, like it's just like, it'll be raining, it'll be summer, like literally meant to be peak summer, and it'll be raining at like 11 a.m. and then all of a sudden the sun will pop out at 3 p.m. and then it'll start raining again at like 9 p.m. and it's just like, fuck me, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Florida. It rains 3 in the afternoon in the rainy season, but in the winter it doesn't rain at all.
I feel like whenever I see stories of somebody in Florida, it's always sunny. Like I never see.
That's because they go during the winter when there's no rain. Nobody comes here in the summer when it rains every day. It's just for 20 minutes. It'll literally be like a thunderstorm for 20 minutes and then it's over. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I listened to the podcast with Hayden a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago at this point. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, far out. Time's flying, huh? I think
Yeah,
it was maybe start of December.
yeah,
But yeah, it was a
nice.
good conversation, and you know, he was the one who kind of he insisted in getting in contact with you,
Yeah.
which you know, it makes sense. I think, you know, especially after the conversation we had a few weeks ago. So what I'll get you to do, man, is do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your journey, kind of how you got to where you are right now, and then a little bit about what you do right now as well, because I think some people will be interested in that.
Okay. So the short version of my story, which hopefully some people are interested in, is um, I like to say I'm a chiropractor by training, but not by trade anymore, and also not really by heart. It's kind of what I went to school for. I was always interested in coaching and fitness, and I did, fitness myself. I did lots of CrossFit. Was coaching people in gyms, was coaching individuals. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I kind of went the clinical route because it was interesting for educational purposes. Um, and I kind of like that. But as you evolve in that curriculum, you kind of uh, figure out what you like and what you don't like about it. But in through that process, since I'm local, I found hybrid. Stephanie has a funny story about how we got connected, but the short version of that is I was bored in class and ended up just commenting on Instagram posts and started a conversation, and that eventually led to like her asking me to come in and like help with content, like helping with some of the social content and also helping build out kind of more kind of long form rigorous kind of educational content, which was kind of the first couple months of what I did, like part-time while I was still in school. And that's kind of when the book started. By the way, we have a book that's will be out soon as of this recording. Hopefully it's available for pre-order at, you know, we'll plug the links at the end. So get to the end. But that's kind of where all that whole process started. But soon after me joining, I kind of fell into working much more on the technical side of things, just because there was like an opportunity there that everyone kind of knew was there. Just no one at that point had kind of taken it upon themselves to do it, and I thought, why not me? And then the more I did it, it was kind of more out of like a sense of obligation that I probably should be the person to know this stuff. And then as I learned more about it, I got more interested in it. And now you kind of discover, and what I was looking for in clinical work, which was just like, kind of a career full of learning. I didn't find as much of that as I would like, and I found more of it in the technical side of things. There's always a new thing to learn, and you learn it for the purpose of building things, which is really cool in my mind. So that's kind of how
When
that went.
when you say technical, you kind of talking about the I guess we're talking technology and I
Yeah,
guess the back end and developing
yeah,
I guess a frictionless service or frictionless products and these kind of things.
yeah. So to my mind, there's like a barrier between like, um, I don't want to say technical and non-technical, but it's like there are certain types of of roles that fall into the category of roles that have certain skills that usually require kind of computer skills, but computer
Mm-hmm.
skills at the level of like programming a machine, and those aren't just like software engineering. That's like, you know, using programming languages to do work to build software that does jobs. It's not necessarily like building websites, but it can be any kind of software. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's like business roles that like will kind of connect that software to the consumer. Um, at least that's kind of in our world where we're working with mostly software, or even the software that connects a consumer to a physical good. There's always kind of software in the middle, and there's people that are kind of working, in front of the software, and then there's people who are working with the software. So there's kind of a hard barrier there.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, you think about it in terms of like, sometimes people think about it in terms of like creatives and logical people, but I don't really see that distinction. There's a high amount of creativity in designing, software. It's just like the type of person that's interested in those things. Like, do you work in Illustrator or do you work in HTML? Like, it's the same creativity. It's just two kind of different ways of, you know, thinking about the same thing, which would be like a document.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean. It's like moving in that direction because there was no one speaking that language to or there's no one speaking that language in my mind that was good enough for like, I felt like I should be the one doing it, right? So there was a period of time where I really invested, and I still do invest because there's a never ending kind of amount of things you can invest your time into learning so that you can operate in that world, right? Which is kind of you can think about in terms of front end or back end. Again, we're kind of all kind of conceptualizing using different language, the same thing, front end or back end or platform or service, like much more on the platform or back end side of things, right? That actually power the user facing experience, right? Because my as I got more and more into the company, we realized that we had all these cool ideas, and and some of them were made real already, but we had more ideas. And the way it became very clear to me very early on, for the first time, because I never really worked that environment, was, oh, to make those ideas real, you have to know how to make them real. And making them real involves building a lot of stuff, right? And you buy stuff so that you can build your own stuff, and then and in our world, the stuff you build is really your competitive advantage. And our core business is a software product.
It's a massive competitive advantage, right? Because what you'll see is like, and you guys can attest to this, is like, there's a big difference between outsourcing something like that, and then obviously having the infrastructure within to build it yourselves, and the flexibility as well to, like what you said, in terms of coming up with ideas and being able to execute them. Whereas if you're, maybe potentially going to outsource these, you have to you probably have to do a lot more due diligence, and there's a larger emphasis on probably effective or efficient judgment, in a sense. Like, it's like, that you literally have to be able to make a call on a certain product because you're outsourcing and probably paying a premium to get it built. And, there's a big chance by the time it gets built, the industry's already moved past it, potentially. So it does make sense with what you're saying, is to have that internally so that you can kind of make it an iterative process, and use customer feedback, which I'm sure we're going to dive into at some point.
Yeah. So so my thing is, right, that goes into the build or buy conversation, is like, what do you build and what do you buy? And probably many people in this conversation will build or buy at a different level. So we chose to build at the level of the software as a service, but we're still buying a ton of stuff, right? We don't host our own servers. Like, almost nobody does that anymore unless you're a huge company. It's like, at what level do you compose the things you buy, and what do you build on top of them? For us, that's a lower level, and kind of probably most, like, sole proprietor coaches out there, or coaches working in small businesses, where they buy the software that's sold to trainers, and then their built deliverable is just what they deliver in the software. But the lower in the stack you go, the more potential value you deliver, right?
Yeah. So like, I'm going to try to make this, I guess, talk the language that people are going to understand. Is the difference that you're talking about within that is, okay, hybrid will build their own software, and, potentially some, other people in the industry may potentially use something like Trainerize or True Coach, or
Exactly.
these softwares that are already built, where you don't have flexibility on what you can do within them, but they do kind of in ways create that frictionless customer experience that we're talking about. I guess we're going to talk about in the future. So that's just I guess, is that a correct way to give people an understanding of what you're talking about?
Yeah, because I think that is the choice. I think that the choice you presented before, which was like, do you go out and do you tell someone, hey, build me software, I'll pay you X tens of thousands of dollars, and then tell me when it's done, is not a real. It's a choice that people offer to people, but it's a trap, because regardless of whether you do that, or you physically hire people and you manage them, that relationship should be no different. And you can't substitute managing people directly if you aren't prepared to, like, really dive into the details of what's being built. Because if you think you are working with a contractor or whatever, and you don't need to worry about any of the thing that's going to be built until it's delivered, then you're setting that relationship up for failure, which is kind of what we talked about before this call. Is that it's very hard to essentially build a product without knowing a lot about how the product works.
And that's kind of, I guess that's what you were talking about before, right? With your role, it's like, you've got that understanding of what the product needs to look like and how it needs to function, which is very different to actually programming it. Because if the programmer doesn't have that understanding, or at least the business person that links the two together doesn't
yeah,
have that understanding of both, then you're probably gonna run into some troubles.
yeah. So there's two things. There's engineering requirements and there's business requirements. So like the business requirements are like, what does the user need to do, right?
Mhm.
What is a successful product, right? What has value in the market? And then there's like the engineering requirements is like, does it load fast enough? Can it actually collect payments? You know, does it,
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. Like, and that's hard stuff. Like, it's not trivial to put something on the internet and then collect money in exchange for that thing, right? The customer's experience with the internet has gotten much better, but the path to deploy things to the internet has not gotten that much easier. It's actually gotten complicated, much more complicated for many things, and there's a significant barrier to deploying things on the internet that are not anything more complicated than like a WordPress site or something, like just like a blog. Like, it's pretty easy to post a blog. It's very hard to post these very kind of complex applications that do many things or serve many purposes. But
it,
yeah, so like that, but that all needs to be considered when building products and features, right? If you're going to take that on, like, because you need to think about authentication, which is a whole thing. You need to think about processing payments. You need to think about speed and performance. You need to think about availability. You need to think about safety, right? You need to think about security and compliance, which is a whole discipline, right? How do you manage keys and like, right? How do you manage your infrastructure, right, to minimize costs? Because you can easily just blow out infrastructure costs by not thinking about how that is hosted, right, and how you minimize your footprint in the cloud. Like, so that's like the engineering stuff, right? And then there's sub-disciplines within that. It's like, if your page doesn't load, like, that's a breaking experience, right? If it fails sometimes, if it fails in unexplained ways, that's also a breaking experience. If it doesn't handle errors, right? These are all basic software principles. If the system isn't built in a way so that it can be maintained, then it works now, but it won't work in the future. So that's not engineering anymore. I
yeah,
heard an interesting quote that the difference between programming and engineering is that engineering is just programming over time, right? So if you program with the idea that it will be working in the future, you're now engineering something. If you just write something, that's programming something. So I think people who go to that level of the product need to have an engineering hat that they can put on, and that's something that has been really valuable to me to learn, and to learn from engineers, and to like and to and to take on engineering projects myself and to learn those lessons has been really valuable. And I think it changes the way you think about any product, and changes the way you approach business problems, because there are a lot of engineers who become great business people. Sometimes it stands in their way, but I think people with engineering backgrounds end up being some of the best business people, because you
100% they do, right? Like
learn
it's
very
very
valuable.
interesting.
Yeah,
Also, you keep going.
yeah,
I
yeah. So I just said you're forced to learn these valuable lessons. So you can come up with all these great examples of engineers who are some of the better CEOs at huge companies, especially technology companies.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, this kind of this initial part of the conversation that we're having. Just I'm reading Elon Musk's biography at the moment. He's probably one of the greatest examples, and it's talking about when he started SpaceX. He had the choice. He could either go and buy a rocket, and then he ended up figuring out that they could um, probably they could build their own rocket, or at least their own engines,
Mm,
for a fraction of the cost. And that ended up becoming their value proposition, right? It was like, we're not going to build the big rockets, the massive ones, but we're going to build these small ones, and we're going to build them at a fraction of the price, which
mm,
probably is bringing aerospace and that kind of sector closer to the everyday customer in a sense, and trying to marry that, which is really interesting, because when you said that, it was kind of like that initial part of the conversation, that was what was binging in my head.
mm.
So what we'll do, we'll kind of get back on track, and we'll go, okay, so what do you do now, right? And what's your main role at Hybrid at the moment?
Okay, so since I classify us as a small company, I know in fitness sometimes we're like this company that people look up to. we're a small, in the grand scheme of things, we're a small company, so we're lean and agile. My role that I carry is chief operating officer, but in reality, I kind of describe myself as a product manager slash, but I do like, data science. So like, because product manager involves like actually getting the data to make decisions. So I actually have to, right, get the data myself. I'm not handed anything. If I have a dashboard, I either have to configure it or build one if one doesn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
to get that information. And then I also work really closely with our development team, like on the app, like so, and on services that kind of either work with the app or will be built in the future. So I get this kind of, I like to think of this kind of, I'm really the owner of the software part of the organization, because the marketing and the content is all so good, and I get to contribute with that, and I get to like interface with that, but like, that's not where I'm needed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my home and where my time is best spent is working on the product. And when I say product, I mean the software, right?
Yeah.
And then also like talking about coaching and helping us kind of deliver a better kind of workout experience, because that's kind of
Yeah.
dependent. It's dependent upon how that stuff is and ends up being kind of served in the product. And since I have some background knowledge in that, that kind of allows me to do
Helps.
that. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's kind of,
It's cool, man. I really love to give that insight to people, because I think that, even just the conversation we've had till now, it does, I've got this firm belief, and a big part of what we are trying to do as a company in our brand vision is to open the scope. You said hybrid's a small company, but in the eyes of many, hybrid probably would be in the, if not the top, in the top, I guess, small businesses within the industry, and a lot of people would see hybrid as a large company, right? And I love that, because our brand vision is we think that the current education provided to fitness business owners actually closes their scope and narrows what they actually believe is possible. And especially kind of when we talk about technology, right? Technology opens that scope. And again, that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, which is really, really cool. So I want to dive now and I guess take this into some considerations, for, the people listening to this podcast, that, over the next, say, 12 months or even 24 months, as we really start to move into this digital era and this digital kind of space in the fitness industry, what are the considerations, and what are I guess, the key things that you believe, the everyday coach, business owner, clinician, whatever it is they're doing, should be taking in and keeping an eye on, and even starting to action when it comes to digitizing their business model?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to address the previous point, right? Peloton is a big business, right? We are a small business. You know, just because we're bigger than most small businesses we talk to, or that there's a lot of aspiring business owners, right? Doesn't mean I think of small as like lean and scrappy and relatively young, which is what we are. But and that might be a good idea to stay small. I know there's some businesses that are like, yeah, we're 300 people, we're small, we're going to be small forever, we like it. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. I think, yeah, people who work in fitness tend to think small, right? Like really small. It's like, man, I'm gonna work in a big company with 30 people. I was like, there are companies with like 100,000 people, you know.
Like Amazon, I think
Try working
Amazon's
with
up to
one of
like
those.
1.5 million or something.
Yeah, try working with one of those. Try working with 100,000 engineers. Like, you're like, oh, so that goes into my point. Is like, I think the bar for digital experiences is so high because there are companies with 100,000 engineers working on that thing.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Facebook.com has 100,000 engineers working on that interface, and everyone's like, why can't I have dark mode on my site? It's like, do you know what it takes to put dark mode on a site? They had to
Listen to the
rebuild.
passion in his voice,
Yeah,
because you know what it takes.
like they Facebook has redone their front end for microseconds of performance like 7 times. And
Crazy.
rewrite, they go down to the level of to very low levels to make sure that first load is really fast and really consistent, and that you get the data you need, and that you don't drain people's batteries. Like they are engineering that site like just right. It's more complicated than getting the space to build a fast website. that works anywhere in the world, that serves a different experience to every user in the world, for good or bad reasons, put politics aside. But people see Facebook and expect every site to be as good as Facebook. So it's a tough challenge, but know that if you give a trash website, or a trash experience, or you make the user jump through a million hoops just to get something that they think should be easy, that users recognize that as a terrible experience, and that might be the reason why they would not do more business with you, right? And we know that just like little things matter, and they matter, at a low level, and they matter in terms of percentages. So it doesn't make that big of a difference when you're on a small scale. But obviously, the more you scale, the more of an absolute difference it makes. Like that time to
100%.
page loads, like the shift in the site, and that's why people end up kind of, mostly buying stuff that they're not prepared to really invest in and build, which is fine. But that just means you need to be a smart consumer, because there's a lot of options out there.
So,
And
would you say that one of those considerations then is friction, right? Like, do you think that that's probably a core consideration when it comes to digitizing a business model?
Yeah, like you want to remove, the idea is there are options out there for your customers to make their lives easier. And if you don't give them those options, they will find someone who does, potentially, right? Or that's an easy way for someone to compete against you. It's like, if everyone's doing it, you kind of have to do it, and it's not going to differentiate you, but it's just part of the arms race of our industry, which is being served by these platforms, which are filling a need in that they are making the experience of customers engaging in fitness, which is a big industry, easier, right? And removing kind of the friction, or we call it like boilerplate, or just kind of pain of their life cycle, which is like, finding and delivering workouts, getting feedback, communicating, logging and storing results. So they kind of handle all that stuff that should be automated, and more of it can be automated over time, with more sophisticated applications. And also, more dangerously, is those automated apps can get pretty good at a much lower price point. So they tend to drive down the value, unless your value proposition is different, right? Right? Unless you kind of very clearly separate what you're offering from what a mass fitness product is offering. It's like, how are you different than Peloton, right? Because Peloton is a ridiculous value proposition. It's a SoulCycle experience for the price of one SoulCycle class per month, right? So you can take 100 Peloton classes, which are arguably better experiences than one SoulCycle class, for the price of one SoulCycle class in your home, right? More conveniently, right? So that's a value proposition, and they did that with technology and great product design, right? And some mechanical engineering that's really good. Like, the bike is really sturdy.
I think
right.
It's a really good point, and I think one of the biggest mistakes that business owners make, especially in the fitness industry, because what we talked about before, the scope, right? They think small, in a sense. And the biggest mistake that people make is that they don't see Peloton as a competitor, and they go, yeah, well, we're personal trainers, we do face-to-face. Like, they're never going to take clients of us. And it's like, competition exists at many different levels. And I think one of the things when creating a product that people need to understand is that every single person has a certain amount of resources, right, that they can afford to spend. So they're either, our two main resources are time and money. So something that you said before about, when we're talking about friction, well, the reason that friction is considered a pain point and could end up in them not using your service is because you're costing them time. Time is a valuable resource, right? So when we think about competition, we got to open our scope and say, well, it's not just about the narrow competition. As a personal trainer, I'm not just competing with the other personal trainers in my gym. I'm also competing with, again, the people that are coming in to see us. They're spending resource with us. They're spending both time and money, right? So can they get the same user experience, the same fulfillment, the same level of self-actualization, all of these things that really kind of matter in the customer's mind? Can they get all of that, from spending less time and less money? And I think that's a key insight I guess, when it comes to friction. And I think it's a big mistake that people make when it comes to competition.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think indirect competition is a term that people should kind of internalize, or just not the idea that they're taking clients away, or that they're just providing a better experience, right? That's divorced from like your domain knowledge. Like, I don't care that you're a better trainer, that you went to school for it. It's like the people in that, at whatever, we're building Apple Fitness, some of them also went to school for it, and some of them are probably pretty knowledgeable. They're just operating at a different scale and with a different set of product constraints, but they are really focused on, they have many that, aside from the different amount of resources they have, but they are also obsessing over the problem of how to get people more excited about fitness, right? Right, because Lily Peloton's mission is like deliver world-class fitness experiences in the home, right? That's like, that's what they do, you know. And they have a company that just kind of works towards that. So the idea is, aren't we all kind of doing the same thing? Maybe not in the home, but we kind of have to audit what our competitive advantage is and make sure that we're at least matching competitors in the areas that aren't our advantage, right? So we can then differentiate for our individual market, right? Which could be a very niche market, right? The idea is like, you can differentiate from Peloton that you go after a market that Peloton doesn't care about, or that Apple doesn't care about. Right? Apple would never care about powerlifters who are super strong. Right?
Yeah, exactly right. It's like, it's like weightlifting, right? So can we provide the same
Yeah.
frictionless experience in weightlifting, but because we're in weightlifting, which is, highly, it's a skill, right? Like it's a skill that needs to be acquired over time, and especially as you creep up the levels, there's going to be a greater need for probably that individualized coaching in a sense, right? So it's understanding that, and that's a really great way to put it, that I think you did before. It's like, we just got to match them, and that's really what it is like, for the individual coaches out there, if there's something that you take away from this podcast when it comes to digitizing your business model, it's probably try to match them on maybe a production side, but also a customer experience side. Maybe, you're never going to be able to match them in terms of the technology, but try to create the same type of experience, because I think what that does for you is it matches you, and then you can differentiate with, within that kind of niche, or, in when it comes to the skills that need to be acquired.
Yeah, because I mean, you can take cues from all of them, even just like, because it's a very scalable model to like do these follow along classes, or like this over the top model, right? Where you're just basically streaming content, right? That's both Apple Fitness and Peloton, and basically all of their competitors, and all these like in the home devices like Tonal and stuff, which is the big money market. They all make a pretty decent attempt at trying to educate their consumer to like use the product better, right? So we all could take cues from how they do that, right, at scale, right, and how they personalize, and how they navigate that challenge of personalization at scale, which is real. That like, if you can get that, that's much more market value than most small businesses could ever hope to capture, right? That goes back to, right, Tesla is an AI business, right? They make computers that go in their cars, and their cars are mostly computers. And then, and similarly, these big fitness companies are big AI businesses that are collecting a lot of user data and trying to give back personal information that's helpful, right? And there's a lot of gamification involved in trying to get people, like, into that, right? Try to enforce certain habits, right? With these rewards and this kind of slot machine behavior, because
Goal enrichment and these kind of things.
Yeah. So like, and it's very easy to do for fitness, and it's like, it works in so many other domains. Like Robinhood is an example of how it works in trading. It's like you throw confetti at people and you give them XP points and you unlock levels. It's like people find your application addictive. It's just like, if you can do that with a fitness app, which is inherently like uncomfortable, but there's also this reward at the end of it, and then you lay down more reward by giving them points, they create this experience that is kind of, self-fulfilling, right? That's so right, that it's training people to continue to engage, because they also know that there's this kind of, that these models that these business models are really dependent upon long-term user engagement. So that's also another thing. It's like, I think in some corners of fitness, people are like, I need to sell this many PDFs to make this much money. I was like, no, you need to sell a lot of subscriptions, right? You need to have, long-term recurring clients if you're a small personal trainer, right? Which is a different business model because it's long-term value that's building over time. And there's an initial kind of time to value. Which is hard in fitness, right? It's like, how can you get people to buy in early? And then how can you keep them engaged for a long period of time? And in gamification, it's called like an end game. It's like, how deep is your end game? It's like, at what point do they like solve the game and are bored with it and they move on? Versus like, is there like an infinite amount of progression they can have? Like, is it like chess? Is like, can they never get too good at your service, right? So that they're kind of motivated to continue. And that's hard to do, right? But that
That's such a good point, though. I think that's probably that'd probably be one of the hardest things to do as a face-to-face personal trainer, right? Like, what's the thing, that how can you continuously gamify what you do to give the customer an experience that they don't get bored of, right? Because
that's mastery of personal training. Like, if you're an average, like, I think especially in any industry, people tend to overestimate their skills, right? If you get a lot of you obviously want to make clients self-sufficient, but you want to make them like, I think in my mind, the great personal trainers, like, oh, my client now goes and works out on their own, but they come back to have like fun with me, right? Or they come back to learn new stuff, right? Because they're kind of hungry to learn new things. And if they come to you for a couple months, they're like, oh no, I know how to count my own reps. I know the thing we do every Tuesday, so I just do it myself now. I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but that might not be good for you. And so also so that's healthy in one way, in that it's like encouraging people to be self-sufficient, which is nice. But you can have that and also have that deep end game where where you've kind of inspired them to kind of start this kind of never-ending journey of learning about fitness, right? And that's not with everyone, but I think that's like, I mean, that's what we talked about in like rehab, is like, how do you create people who are engaged with their rehab program? Is like, you got to make it a game. How do you create in on-field kind of practice scenarios? Like, the more game-like it is, while enforcing some sort of skill development, then the more people are going to be engaged, and the more they're going to get out of it. So in general, that idea of gamification is really what I took from coaching and clinical practices. Like, when you're doing something physical, you are solving a movement problem that is essentially a game, right? There's a success condition and a failure condition, and there's some reward for success. But the idea is that should be matched to your ability level, and there should be no upper bound to your ability to basically match a task to that person's ability, right? There is no final level in that analogy.
And that's the challenge, right?
I hope that helps for in-person personal trainers thinking about it a little differently. So you're not just 100%. You're not just like throwing balls around just to make it fun, but you're actually creating novel challenges in certain ways. But also, and again, that's the art of it, is like, yeah, there's a certain amount of repetition, just progression that you need to do, but there's also opportunities for that novelty, but not for its own sake, right? In my mind, it's easier in a digital product because it's very clear how people play games in a digital product, and you can just mimic some of that to encourage certain behavior. It's like, if you want people to work out consistently, you create rewards for streaks, right? If you want people to record all of their metrics, you create rewards for rewarding metrics, and you create some sort of like weird, little penalty for not, like, reminding them if they didn't or something like that, but not necessarily like forcing them to do anything, but like patting them on the back when they do something that you think they should do, and nudging them in that direction when they don't do it, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's really interesting that we talk about that, because that's probably what, I mean, for a consumer who's not a consumer, for a business owner who, isn't 110% in that technological space, one of the things that you've got to try to do is to find a way to gamify, right? And to continuously gamify, like you said, unlocking levels, giving these pats on the back. How do we get to a point where we can track that? And I think that's where I would see that you're going to see the most progress, especially now that we are in, very quickly moving to this technological age, right? Where, the Pelotons and the Apple Fitnesses and these guys are, they're kind of moving at the speed of light, and the rate of technological growth is only going to compound from here on in, right? So it's one of those things that if you can start to, like you said before, take some of these insights and start to implement into your business on a smaller scale, I think you're going to see you're probably going to start to separate yourself from the pack, which is kind of what we're talking about with digitizing your business in a sense.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to like people being aware of those things because they're in the market, right? There's technology companies that see that opportunity and are selling that to businesses that are dealing with the end consumer. And so it's really up to the business owner to like really curate that experience from the tools they have available. So at any level, you still need to know the tools that are available, and it's like worth the time to invest in exploring them and to like, to try them and kind of go through that process. I think a lot of people, there's some people who are really inclined to do that. They tend to be engineers, like they love learning tools and figuring out how these tools work. But some people who aren't that kind of that disposition don't, and they think like of dealing with these like it's learning another thing. It's like why isn't the thing I already have good enough? Like why aren't my spreadsheets good enough? I already know how to do those. I don't need to go through this learning curve again. um, they think the experience of learning it is just full of like irritation, but that is like debugging, right? I don't know how to do something, I spend 10 minutes figuring out how to do something, I was like a waste of time. I think that's a barrier to learning anything technological, and especially the computer science, because like your program never works. You can spend, a week not knowing why your program works, right? But eventually it works, right? But people think that's like wasted time who are not into that stuff. And that's kind of their barrier to continuing. And that's also why there's such a steep learning curve potentially in my mind at least. But I think that's the same conversation that kind of needs to be reframed, is that is time well spent learning how something works through trial and error and through experience, right?
And
Because
it's a it's a short-term mindset, right? Like, it's like, yeah, I'm spending potentially 40 hours now, down the line, now to learn something. And that's probably on the higher end, like you could probably gain some insight on this stuff in 10, right? And spending that 10 hours in the short term may not seem worth it, but what it could save you in the long term is the difference between only being able to scale your business with hiring new people,
yeah,
or other coaches, compared to maybe potentially really digitizing your business model, which creates large economies of scale and, allows you to really scale your company, quite
yeah.
aggressively.
And I think if you're the business owner, your mandate is to know not to know everything about everything, but to know a little bit about everything,
Exactly
right?
right, and that's what opens the scope.
Yeah. So if you haven't fiddled with it, you kind of know how it works, and you just kind of delegate it to someone else. That's that kind of makes me nervous. Um, so right, and since right, it's ultimately you're responsible for it, so you should feel kind of some ownership over it. So that should be motivation enough. Two, yeah, like that short term mindset of like, yeah, this learning curve is steep now, but it gives me superpowers and like
Yeah,
next week.
yeah,
Like why wouldn't you do that? That was my thing. There's a big movement in kind of this data science world of like Excel is nice, but there's a certain point where Excel, you sunk so much into Excel that like you should have just learned to code, and it takes like it's much easier just to do all what you did in a programming language than to like coax the Excel interface into giving you this chart, and it's always going to be that much work. And you've invested so much time into learning everything about Excel. There's like people who do any sort of work with spreadsheets should probably just migrate to these kind of programming notebooks. Like Google hosts them too, like so you can have a hosted Python environment and just manipulate your data there. There's just an initial learning curve of learning some Python, right? But once you get through that, you're like, oh, I can do things with my data so much faster, so much easier. I can save it for later and reuse it. I can do all these amazing things with software and not have to spend 10 hours a week filling with spreadsheets. I can actually automate most of the admin work.
and my message is take note, right? Like
Yeah,
this is if you want to be a great business and you kind of want to start to move beyond just beyond the pack and really start to digitize your business, then really take note, because as I said, hybrids obviously, a company that is still a small business in kind of, if we're talking in the technical terms, right? But it's one that's accelerating and is able to move at the speed of light. And
Yeah.
if you want to make something of yourself over the next 10 years in the industry, then I think that's some great advice for anybody that does.
Yeah. So one thing I want to add, because it just came to my head, another quote that I like about event engineering. I think I have a book somewhere here. It's a book about like software engineering principles. There's another one is like software engineering is, or engineering in general is, the practice of building things you've never built before. So there's learning baked into it because you have to learn how to build it. So there's a lot of practices from great engineering that we can take to any business endeavor, and that's one of them. Is like really doing anything valuable in business is building something that you've never built before. It may have been built similarly by someone else, but the exact version that you're building has never been built before. So to do that, you have to upfront know that there's going to be a lot of learning involved, and it's not always as clear as it is in other domains, which is also
Yeah, I look at business that way though, right?
yeah.
Like that's the way I look at business. It's like if I
Yeah.
want to go to some place that I've never been, I've got to learn the stuff that I don't know, like that's where my passion for business comes from. It's like I'm the engineer of my business.
Exactly.
I've got to understand the function, and if there's a function that I don't understand, then that's always going to be my rate limiter, right? And I think that's one of the things when it comes to business, I fucking hate it, man. Like I'm going to be honest about the fitness industry, is that narrowed scope is because it's obviously it's because of the past education, right? Like, but naturally it's like, you're the engineer of your business, and your business won't grow unless you have that curiosity and that will to learn whatever is needed to learn, because you've got that inner engineer in you. So um
Yeah. So like,
that's
yeah. So my thing with that is, right, people can refuse to kind of deal with that distance because they can lie to themselves, or you can't lie to a computer, right? You have to have a very explicit contract with a computer, right? So it does what you want it to do, and you can't lie to it, and it doesn't lie back to you. So you have to learn these things, right? But in the business environment, you're like, yeah, I'm building my business, but all I'm doing is chasing the next dollar at the expense of the dollar after that, right? Or I'm not actually thinking long term about how I'm building, a stable, right, system that actually delivers meaningful value to people's lives. It's like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Right? We can just tell other stories to ourselves and continue on kind of, living this unobserved business life. But if you were
That
forced to
is,
speak,
that is, if
you know,
there's one thing you take away from this podcast, it is that. That is one of the best ways to put it. I'm going to steal that. I'm definitely going to fucking steal that, because
pleasure.
the dissidence that sits with 80% of the industry, right? And that's why we talk about it. The scope is so narrow. The what is possible is so narrow. It's like, they don't, unfortunately, business owners don't believe what's possible because they're always chasing that next dollar. And it's a
Yeah. So
shame, man, because our industry and what happens in it is, if we can raise the minimum standard just by 10%, just imagine what the industry is capable of.
yeah, I mean, that was my complaint with like the rehab world too, is that I just wasn't happy with the way people thought about it, and I wasn't happy with, you know kind of that level of care and detail people took, towards what they actually deliver to people, and also the care and attention they took to their own kind of progression, right? There was like a point where people were just satisfied, and it's okay to be, I'm not saying, like, be hard on yourself, but I'm saying is like, you you do so much better for the world when you learn for its own, just to learn, not knowing what you're not with the expectation that you get something immediately back for it, just because it's part of what you do, and that enriches. One, I think enriches. I value it, so it enriches my life, but also it enriches your ability to help other people through through your work in ways that you don't immediately understand. And it's never like a bad idea, right? I think told several people, it's like learning anything is a good idea. It doesn't matter what it is, right? So as long as it interests you, right, it's not a waste of time, right? Especially if it's not, especially if you're not paid, if you're paid, if you're paid by the hour and it's not during your job, then it's definitely not a waste of time. But if you're a business owner, then sometimes I think people might feel like it's a distraction, or it's not the thing they should be doing to build their business. But and that might be the case, but if you can get to the point where it is your job to learn things, then I feel like it is your mandate to do that, and to show people that you do it, not to prove how smart you are, but just to be an example for what you expect from people, and also so to genuinely figure out new solutions to novel problems, right? Because it's hard to know what's possible without learning, right? Without continuously learning what other people are doing, or what the possibilities are, right?
It's music to my ears, man. I think that last passage of probably the last couple of minutes will give a lot of insight, and I think it's magical in a sense, like that actually made me emotional in a little way, because I think I feel very similar to that in our brand vision as a company of what we're trying to do.
You have an education company.
Exactly, right. And I think that's something that's getting lost, especially in the business space. Like, a lot of people, and this has been, it's the program mentality where it's like, I invested this capital, I should be getting X return, and education, that's not what it's there for. Education, like you said, learning for the sake of learning is a beautiful thing, and I think it's a lost art or a lost concept when it comes to business, unfortunately, because business is viewed through a different lens potentially to what acquiring a skill, maybe such as becoming a great powerlifting coach, or acquiring these skills that makes you a great powerlifting coach and these kind of things, or weightlifting coach, bodybuilding coach, whatever it is that you do. I think business, if it's looked at through the same lens, will create such a higher standard of business owner in the industry. So you were recently involved in the writing of a book.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to give that a little plug and tell everyone a little bit about that?
Yes, time to plug the book. The book is called Back in Motion. It's really a book about back pain. It's a prescriptive book about kind of what to do when you experience back pain, whether it's like serious injury or kind of recurring back pain. It has a lot of stories. Like, obviously it features Steffi's stories, and she co-wrote it. And really kind of drive like the pace of it. We also have like Matt Frazier and Hafthor Bjornsson really talk about their experience with pain as a lead athlete. And we just try to give people context around back pain so that they're more empowered to deal with it. And that is kind of for the coach, client and clinician. So there's kind of a little bit of something for everybody. And it's kind of in language that anyone can understand. So it's not a clinical book at all. And it's short, digestible. So we're selling that through our website, and you can go to what's the website? You can go to highperformancemethod.com, and it'll be under the Back in Motion tab. I think it's /Back in Motion. Yeah, and it will be available shortly. So it's available for pre-order as of this recording, but probably when this is released, when you buy it, it should be shipped to you. Yeah. So awesome. I mean, that plug. So, and also generally you can find me at highperformancemethod.com, where we sell training and nutrition and digital courses and more stuff to come.
Awesome. Big thanks for coming on the podcast, man. And I will definitely probably be shooting you a lot of messages in the near future.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
I just want to say a big thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the show. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Feel free to share the episode with your friends and family, and feel free to leave us a review as well. We all the support that we get for the show, and especially now that we've revamped it, we're trying to bring something that's got a little bit more value. It's definitely appreciated. And if you have a question for strategy sessions next week, you want us to take a bit of a deep dive and help you work through some of the roadblocks in your business, or you just want some help creating some winning strategy, you can shoot me an email at kyle@elitevitalitycoaching.com. But I'll leave it there. Until next week, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the other side.